What we'll do on the topic of data centers is draw out what a typical data center looks like. And as we draw it out, we'll discuss the important topics. Things like power, cooling and heat dissipation, physical access, grounding, raised floors, all of that kind of stuff. So let's start out with our data center floor plan. Pretty basic right now. What we're looking at is an overhead view of a small data center that we're about to build. A rectangular room with 2 entry and exit doors. Down the east wall, we've just added 3 power distribution units, or PDUs. And as we want this data center to be highly resilient, let's add some more PDUs down the west wall. If you look closely, you'll notice that we've labelled the PDUs on the east wall as PDU A and the PDUs on the west wall all as PDU B. And this is important. We've done this because we have 2 independent power feeds coming into our data center. We call one feed A and the other feed B. So all the power feeds coming into the PDUs on the east wall are from feed A, and the feeds coming into the PDUs on the west wall are from feed B. This means we can lose the entire power source supplying PDUs on the east wall without the PDUs on the west wall being affected at all. And as we'll see later, all of our data center kit will be dual fed, with one power feed from a PDU A and a separate power feed from a PDU B. This is an N+1 resilient power configuration. But let's park our discussion on power for a minute and we'll add some racks. Okay, what we've just done is added an entire row of 11 data center racks. These racks are where we install our servers, networking and storage equipment. We've called the first row of 11 racks row A. Now let's add another 2 rows so that we've got 3 rows each of 11 racks, giving us a total of 33 racks in our data center. Now then, let's talk about cooling and airflow. Airflow and associated heat dissipation in a data center is extremely important. Most modern data centers are built around some form of hot aisle, cold aisle model. Let's explain this with our diagram. As we can see, the racks in row A on our diagram are pulling cold air in from the front and they're expelling hot air from the rear. Row B is then configured so that the rear of the racks in row B are facing the rear of the racks in row A, meaning that the racks in row B expel hot air into the same aisle as the racks in row A, with cold air obviously being sucked in from the opposite side. Row C is then configured in a similar manner, so that it pulls in cold air from the same aisle as row B and expels it from the opposite side. And what we have here is a classic hot-cold aisle configuration. The aim being to keep the hot and cold air from mixing, avoiding a situation where some equipment is sucking in hot air that's just being expelled from other equipment. And that's because sucking in hot air to try and keep something cold is just generally not a good idea. And it really is as simple as the fronts of racks facing each other and the rear of racks facing each other. Not rocket science, but also not perfect. For example, without physical air containment infrastructure, hot and cold air will tend to move around the data center and eventually mix. And for that reason, more advanced air containment systems are often deployed, such as fully enclosing cold aisles so that hot air cannot enter the cold aisle, or vice versa, fully containing the hot aisles so that hot air can be channeled out of the data center without mixing with the cold air. Some data centers even channel cold air in the floor void and pump it into the cold aisle via vents in the floor tiles. Whatever the technique is though, it's massively important to keep hot and cold air away from each other in the data center, as most data centers literally expend tons of energy just keeping the temperature cool. In fact, it's not uncommon for a data center to consume more power just keeping it cool than it does on powering actual equipment like servers, networking and storage. Seriously, keeping IT kit cool is expensive business. Now let's switch our attention back to power. It's important to point out that power in most data centers will be fed via an uninterruptible power supply, or UPS for short. This UPS often provides power to the equipment in the event that mains power is lost, and it usually does this via batteries, as well as providing protection against power spikes and power surges, what we call delivering clean power to equipment. Anyway, back to our data center floor plan. Let's clear away the hot aisle, cold aisle stuff. And let's add some power feeds to our cabs. As we can see, every rack in each row is supplied with power from a PDU on the east wall and also a PDU on the west wall, giving us redundant power supplies to each and every rack in the data center. This means that if we lose all power to the PDUs on the east wall, every rack could still have power from the PDUs on the west wall. And this is hugely important. It not only protects our IT equipment from power failures in either of the independent supplies, it also allows maintenance works to be carried out on power systems. And most data centers will carry out at least annual power system maintenance and testing. So not having to turn off your kit once a year while the data center guys perform power maintenance is a really good thing. Also on the topic of power, each rack in the data center is capable of providing a certain amount of power to the kit that's installed in it. In our example data center, we show that each rack in row A is capable of providing 12 kilowatts of power. This means that the maximum amount of power that kit in the racks in row A can draw is 12 kilowatts, a total of 132 kilowatts of power for all equipment in row A. But remember, the more power per rack, the more cooling is required. And having the ability to monitor and report on power consumption is increasingly important, as data center power is often charged for on a consumption basis. You pay for what you use. Some power monitoring and reporting systems work at the PDU and allow you to monitor how much power is being used from a particular PDU. And that's great, but it doesn't easily allow you to drill down into specific cabinets and individual items within cabinets. So if cabinet 1 in row A houses a storage array that you're looking to replace, and you need to know how much power the storage array is currently consuming, you can't easily find that out from a power monitoring system that only monitors power at the PDU. What you need is a system that gives you cab-specific data. That is, data specific to equipment in individual cabinets. Also on the topic of racks and rows, data centers often have raised floors so that power cabling and network cabling can be done under the floor where it's safely out of the way. But this then brings up the point of how much weight can the floor bear. In our example data center, we show that the raised floor supporting row A is capable of supporting 750 kilograms, or slightly over 1,600 pounds per rack, whereas rows B and C are capable of supporting significantly more weight per cab. And this can be important, especially if you're deploying kit in racks in increasingly high densities. The last thing you want is your rack falling over as the floor beneath it collapses. And these things can and do happen if you don't plan weight bearing correctly. Actually, while on the topic of weight, let's mention a couple of important points. First of all, make sure that you install heavy equipment at the bottom of the rack. If you don't, there's a good chance that the rack could fall over while you slide heavy equipment in and out of higher positions in the rack. And we definitely don't want racks falling over, right? Also of importance, particularly to your health, make sure that when you're racking and unracking equipment, and I guess just lifting heavy equipment in general while in the data center, make sure that you use proper lifting techniques and don't lift items that are too heavy for you. In fact, the act of installing equipment in racks and uninstalling it from racks should probably always be a two-man job. Time for one final quick point while we're looking at our data center floor plan. Physical access. as your company's most critical systems exist in the data center, you really want to make sure that it's physically safe and secure. Only authorized personnel should be allowed to access the data center. This means things like swipe cards and sometimes biometric scanners on all physical entry points. So let's quickly recap some of the data center facilities we've just discussed, as well as cover off some of the important data center related topics before we finish up the lesson.